quiet town, Perth continued to be a source of so much trouble for Graeme Souness. On his drive home on the night of Wednesday, 26th of February 1991, he told his friend Ian Blythe, "I've had enough of this. It is becoming unbearable." Back in the October visit to McDermott Park, Souness had followed his new, expensive and injured defender back into the dressing room to sit with him. He asked the St Johnstone tea lady, Aggie Moffat, to fetch him a cuppa, which she duly refused. After this next trip in February, another frustrating draw, Souness asked his players to place the mud off their boots into piles so it was easier to clean up. But Moffat was not impressed. She also complained about the general state of the dressing room and a smashed jug of orange juice, and she said she would go directly to the chairman, Jeff Brown. Souness then duly followed her into the corridor, shouting and swearing about what she expected the floor to look like after a game of football. Brown assured Moffat that he would look into it, to which Souness replied, "I am here, look into it now." When Brown made a move to take hold of the Rangers manager's arm, the temperature increased dramatically as threats were made if he didn't remove his grip. It was an embarrassing farce that was starting to become part of the script. By this stage, Liverpool had made contact, but had been quickly rejected. As Souness admitted in his 1999 book, however, a seed had been planted, and it was only human nature to wonder privately what it would be like to go back. Many of the people I knew during my time as a player were still at the club, so perhaps it was only natural to daydream about what it might be like to go back. After that drive home, that breezy reverie turned into a more concrete desire. To discuss the machinations behind Graeme Souness's departure and much more, I'm joined by David Edgar. How are we doing?
I am good, thank you. Yes, looking forward to it. Dear Lord, can you please spare me from Scottish football characters like Aggie Moffat? For another term for it might be jumped up cow who didn't know her place and should have been told in no uncertain terms by St Johnstone what her place was. So I'm very much looking forward to getting back in to discussing that. Much as soon as shouldn't have reacted, etc., etc. Unbelievable behaviour from St Johnstone.
Yeah, I don't think Souness will get away with that now, that's for sure.
I don't think, no, she wouldn't be allowed to do that now. Yeah. If an employee was as disrespectful as that to the opposition manager, they'd be out on their arse.
And we're off and running. Before even introducing our full panel, good evening, Alan. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing absolutely fine. As David said, but how ridiculous, Martyn. Probably one of the greatest Scottish footballers, with all the medals he has, the kind of European Cups and whatever else. He's now Rangers player manager, he's a director and so on, and you've got Aggie the tea woman. It just, you couldn't make it up, could you?
Well, yeah, we didn't need to, because as I said, it was really becoming part of this weird, tumultuous season where Souness was just never seeming in control. We finished last week with Andy and John. After a very impressive winter, David, Rangers in this long unbeaten run, 17 games, 15 in the league, 2 in the cup, of which that draw at St Johnstone was one of them. And some big wins, 3 huge wins in a row, away to Dundee United, home to Celtic, away to Hearts, and a lot of good football. This is the longest unbeaten run Souness has ever had, and some of the best football his team's ever played, in spite of the kind of maelstrom inside Ibrox, the issues outside. But what we're going to talk about, I guess, is some of those chickens coming home to roost. February 22nd, a Friday, the night before, Kenny Dalglish had given quite an emotional press conference after a FA Cup replay against Everton, in which he was resigning after so long as the top man. Liverpool still top of the league at that point. They would not finish top of the league in that English First Division season. But the effects of Hillsborough and that stress really coming to bear, a kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome, I guess, David. It was quite a surprising move. And Graeme Souness, the week after the St Johnstone game, which was on the 26th of February, as I said, in the Rangers news, and going nowhere. Liverpool had been in touch, but he had rebuffed them very quickly, very immediately, very naturally, I think. He had a job here, and as Alan's touched on, he's a director. He has a stake in this club. Before we talk about Souness and everything that transpires, can I just ask about your recollections of the Dalglish resignation, because it kind of came out of the blue.
Yeah, it did. It's one of these things that's a lot easier to see with hindsight. And Kenny Dalglish attended every funeral after Hillsborough, which, while a hugely commendable thing to do, that's grueling. That very much is, and he couldn't get over it. It scarred him badly. You and I have discussed on other shows this thing about football management. People can't take breaks. People aren't allowed to say, "Look, I'm done in, and I need a year off," and come back to the job. You don't get sabbaticals. You do in most other industries, especially high pressure ones, but you do not in football. You're either all in or you're not. And I think that he was emotionally spent, and it must be difficult when you have sat with the families of 95 people who've lost their life to get up for football matches. It must be, you must think there's more to life than this. And the emotional charge that it took from him, the emotional price that he paid was enormous. And I think if you look at photographs of Kenny Dalglish around about that time, he's a shell. He's not the guy that we've known apart from that period, and he was just completely and utterly done. And that's on top of the burdens of being, a football manager of a huge club anyway, which is a tremendous responsibility. And I think that we also forget that he took over just after Heysel. So it was the second hugely emotional issue that he'd gone through inside 5 years. I don't think it's surprising. And actually, I think that he did the right thing for him, because it could have had much worse longer term effects on him. And I think that, Kenny Dalglish is Liverpool through and through. Anyone who remembers his short-lived, incredibly disinterested spell at Celtic in 99-2000 will understand that there's one club for him, and it's Liverpool. And that was a 4-each draw, that match, I think, in the FA Cup that you spoke about. I mean, it was an incredible game of football, and I just think that he was completely and utterly done in. Initially, there was straight away, they'll go for Souness. Souness does come out and say, "Well, no, I'm not going." But I don't know. I just, even as a kid, I remember talking to my dad, and I'm getting a wee bit older now and a wee bit more. My dad, who, isn't a natural pessimist, but he was saying to me, this is his team, and I'm like, no, Rangers is his team, and he's, no, son, this is his team, this is a big one. And I was like, but he loves it here. And I said, well, and my dad said to me, imagine if you were the manager of Liverpool and Rangers came in for you, would you go? And I said, well, yeah, of course I would. And he said, exactly. So I think I had the possibility in my mind that he would go. When he said no, that was great, but up until that position got filled, and names were mentioned, by the way, Franz Beckenbauer was linked with that post. There were obviously English contenders as well. Howard Wilkinson, I remember, being highly spoken of as well. And then, as always with Liverpool, there was a lot of talk about where they've got the boot room. So it might be Roy Evans was mentioned, the first time I really remember hearing about Roy Evans. And up until they filled it, I wasn't really resting easy.
Alan, were you worried initially? Again, just come back to this shocking, dramatic resignation of Kenny Dalglish.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember watching the game. It was an amazing game. I think Graham Sharp caught got a couple too, and just at the end of it, and as David said as well, just Kenny Dalglish, he just looked haunted. And I remember seeing a quote from him around about the time as well, and he said that, I think even when they lost the first goal, he went, "We need to do something at the back, to change things." He says, and I didn't. He says, I just sat there. He says, and that was the final, for him, just saying, "No, that's it. I've got to get out." But no, I think I would be just coming up in 30 then. So yeah, I just always saw, although Graeme Souness gave you a born a Rangers player and so on, I always thought Liverpool was his club, anyway. And when Kenny Dalglish went, I was thinking, will he go? It's a bit like the kind of, let me think. It was a bit like the kind of Steven Gerrard thing about maybe they'll hold off and maybe we'd go, at summertime. And again, I think as David said, even when you go back and go no, you wonder if that's even just starting a negotiation in terms of what else are you going to give me, And also all of this, I think we mentioned before, he was fighting, he was causing bother everywhere. And then I think maybe a season or so, Martyn, he seemed to calm, didn't he? And it was a bit more. But
last season, yeah, and at the start of 89-90, even though the results were wild.
It was amazing. He was measured and he was kind of calm and so on. But all the way through this season, and again, obviously with the McCoist stuff too, it just seemed, there was just something there. He just felt as if he really doesn't want to be here.
Yeah.
But as far as we were concerned, it was more a timing thing, I think.
Well, I mean, I'm younger, obviously, and that Rangers News front page was greeted very warmly in my heart. David didn't quite have a cynical mind yet. I took that quite literally, but yeah, regular listeners will know the path to here has been coming. That the start to the season previous, as I said, he looks fresh and invigorated. I think he's being the leader and the statesman and the calm presence because you have this Mo Johnson circus that could go up at any minute. He has to be like that, especially when results aren't quite going right. But the STV thing in the tunnel against Hearts in the February of 1990, I think starts him on this path externally. This war with the SFA, they are talking about lifetime bans. He's already banned for the touchline for 2 years. It is a ridiculous situation outside, and he's causing fights inside. Butcher's gone, and we're going to talk about McCoist again.
Even with our supporters as well, Martyn, he's already...
As I said last week, he's picking fights with Rangers support. And this thing with the tea lady, so it was a 1-1 draw at McDermott Park that night, Peter Houstra scored. But this is just nonsense, right? The Rangers manager does not get involved in fights about broken jugs and anything else. Right. Different accounts about what happens next. Walter Smith, in his book from 1994, he suggests that as soon as raised the question first with him and Phil Boersma as they were in the sauna, Bellhouston Park, the kind of health club, after training, which was something they would normally do, chat about life, football, whatever. And he said, look, Liverpool are interested. And he was just trying to sound Smith out, really. What do you think about him going there? Smith had some concerns, like, you can't go to Anfield and do what you did here. Rangers have been years without success. Liverpool are champions of England and are doing all right at the moment. You're probably going to have to tread a lot of toes to make the changes that you want to make. They're going to be less receptive than people were here. Ben Souness rejected that offer. He did his Rangers News thing. And then a few weeks later, in March, the subject came up again when the two of them were on a flight down to London to just take in a game of football. And at this time, according to Smith, Souness wasn't looking for an opinion. He was taking the job. Would he come with him as assistant? Smith says that he didn't want to leave Ibrox. He'd worked so hard to get there. And even then, if he did go, he didn't think he was going to fit into the Liverpool boot room. He's not a product of that. He's an outsider. And he felt, probably correctly, that was going to be hard. And Souness had the guys like Roy Evans and Ronnie Moran and guys like that already there. He didn't need a Walter Smith. And that was that. Souness's account in his book in 99 is slightly different. The scenery remains the same. They're still in that Bellhouston Health Club sauna, and he's asking Smith and Boersma to go. Boersma immediately delighted. And Souness says that Walter was also very keen, which is important to me because I was prepared to turn the job down unless Phil and Walter were joining me. Then they went down on that flight to London to meet with Noel White and Peter Robertson from Liverpool at the Heathrow Holiday Inn. That was the purpose of that flight. It was then that Smith kind of got cold feet about the backroom issue and said no. But by that point, Souness was already on the way. David, nothing new in this Rangers story throughout this period in time. Usually it's Graeme Souness that contradicts himself in the space of 2 or 3 books that he's put out. It doesn't really matter, I suppose. We know what happens, but it is interesting that they do vary wildly. Remember though, when Walter Smith is putting his book out, he is Rangers manager. He has been for a couple of years, but at that moment, this is 1994, Christmas 94, that book's going out. Is on a bit of a sticky wicket after a bit of a disappointment in Europe 2 seasons in a row. Of course he's going to say, I didn't even entertain it, but no, at this moment in time, no guarantee Walter Smith's going to be the next manager of Rangers.
we always want things in black and white, and conversations aren't always black and white. Two people can go into a room and come out with completely different recollections of what was said. The Granita dinner being a wonderful case in point of that, 10 years later they were still arguing about it. So I think in any employment, and it is employment, that you don't rule stuff out and you keep your options open. Walter Smith, I'm sure, would have felt he was in contention for the job, but would also understand the temptation for David Murray would be to go out and get a big name, and that might count against him. In which case, does he want to stay on as assistant to a new manager? And also, will the new manager want to keep him on as his assistant? So, of course, you're not going to rule out, because you might be looking for work. And if you say to Souness no and he goes and fills the job, you're turning down a job that's there already. Secondly, any of these books from the 90s, I always wonder just quite how much the player or the manager was actually involved in getting the text onto. You might find a 200-page book had a 1-hour interview that became the nucleus of it. So there's that as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You're not gonna say. And again, it was, I wanted to stay at Rangers. Rangers was my number one, but I kept my options open. You're not going to say that, and you're right when you say it's borne out by what actually does happen as opposed to what might have. But he would have been a very silly man, as any of us would be, that if he'd ruled things out right at the start, he could have been left with nothing at all, and that would have been very foolish. He has a family. That's his number one priority. And, while I'm sure he knew he would be in contention for that job, there was zero chance that, there was no way that he could say, I will definitely get it. He could not fully believe that up until, I'm sure, he signed the contract. The other thing as well is about Souness. You mentioned it there, he can contradict himself. Walter was very keen because I wouldn't have taken the job without him, and then he takes the job without him. So Souness has got a tendency, as you say, to sort of forget things, and like a lot of alpha males, he has a tendency to hear what he wants to hear and to see what he wants to see. And I think that you probably do need that if you're going to be successful at the level that he has been successful at. But I think that Walter was aware he would be in contention, but I'm sure understood that things might change. And also when you're dealing with David Murray was somebody who would tell you one thing and then a week later tell you another and swear blind that you'd picked him up wrong. Yeah. And you could play him the tape back and he still wouldn't believe you. And more importantly, you'd leave the room thinking that he had, he'd convince you as well.
To one of the shows last year with Souness and Murray and Michael Knighton. Souness went to bed believing that he was going to be in Manchester.
He's going to go, yeah.
And Murray changed all of that. Another thing that Smith writes in that book, Graeme must have been under considerable personal pressure, he said. There must have been a tremendous inner turmoil, and yet he hid that from everybody. Not a single player suspected anything. It was amazing how he was able to concentrate his mind the way he did. I admired that immensely. Now, Smith is correct to appreciate the pressures around Souness. I don't think any of us can imagine that at that moment in time. But I think the praise for control is wildly overplayed. Until that day that a baggage handler at Heathrow Airport told Souness that Kenny Dalglish had resigned, Rangers had been on, as I said, that incredible run. After that, they went into a bit of a tailspin. McDiarmid Park was followed by a defeat, the first in 17 games, at Pittodrie, with Aberdeen chasing a 1-0 defeat. McCoist and Johnson had missed some huge chances. That cuts the gap to 4 points. And worse was to come, Alan, at Parkhead, because there was a double header in the Cup and the League, 17th to 24th. The Cup game, Scottish Cup quarter-final, Rangers lost 2-0 and had 3 players sent off, Mark Hateley, Mark Walters and Terry Hurlock. This is after such a long run without a red card. We thought that page had been turned really on that early Souness era. These were added to a kind of growing injury list, which was a bit ridiculous, which meant that the league game on the 27th of March, Souness, whether he had to, whether he chose to, fielded an absolute nonsense team. Rangers lost 3-0 at Parkhead and would have another red card that day, Scott Nisbet. I'll give you the team here. Chris Woods, Gary Stevens, Tom Cowan, Richard Goff, Nigel Spackman, Scott Nisbet, Davy Dodds, Ian Ferguson, Alan McCoist, Mo Johnson, John Spencer. Dodds, McCoist, Johnson, Spencer. 4 forwards. Peter Houstra and Sandy Robertson were on the bench. So it doesn't really make sense. Injuries starting to bite, but there's still 9 regular starters at that Aberdeen game.
Yeah, I mean, they were crazy ones, Martyn. I mean, to add insult to injury, the first one was on St Patrick's Day as well.
Yeah.
I remember going to Parkhead, and I think they get 2 early goals, didn't they? Creaney 6 minutes, and I think Dovchik deflected free kick. So that one itself, and we completely, I mean, some of the challenges we went in, it was like, straight reds and so on. But I remember, like you saying, really pessimistic, obviously going to the next one, looking at, the team, because we'd been out. We absolutely played them off the park, and believe it or not, in the second one, it was just sucker punches. I think, was it Spencer had a couple of... No, but
that'll happen when you've no midfield.
No, you're right. But I mean, honestly, David Rangers had about like 6 or 7, like really good chances and dominated. And you're right, it was just like absolutely ridiculous kind of goals that we lost in that one. But I remember feeling so low. I know John mentioned before, always going to Parkhead, and in fact, I think we hadn't, I don't know if it was about 9 games, but I mean, Old Firm games in the league, up until, the kind of Celtic one there, we had been doing really well. But because of the first one, you go into the second one, and I think after that one, I remember coming back from the 3-0 one, and that's when you started looking, and then you're thinking, shit. And now I think in the end, obviously Aberdeen went on an absolutely amazing run. I think out of 13 of their last games, they draw 1, they lose 1. But at that time, that was when you just started looking over your shoulder a wee bit and going, shit, the kind of goal difference in the points.
The thing is, Alan, this had happened last year. If you cast your mind back to a few episodes ago, Rangers had this great winter and were 7 points clear, then went around 6 games without a win, but we're only cut back to 5 points. This is slightly different. Things were starting to get tense, David. And again, the manager.
Yeah, the players are also joining the dots, Martyn. I think you've said it too. David Murray have joined with that whole, look, Liverpool are looking for him. So I definitely feel that there's definitely some impact, on the squad and so on.
Yeah, Smith is adamant. No one knew that Souness was taking this job, certainly in the playing staff. But David, it's Souness's handling of this situation again compared to this time last year when he was in control and giving out the right messages. It's McCoist that gets scapegoated. Before that Scottish Cup game, Rangers players given a bit of time off to relax. McCoist took the opportunity to go to Cheltenham for the National Hunt Festival, as he liked to do. And unlike golf, this wasn't banned. And he got a late flight home to make sure he picked up the squad in time. Souness asked him if he'd been to the races and smiled when McCoist confirmed. On the day of the Scottish Cup tie, McCoist had to be stopped from leaving the ground by Bobby Lennox. Such was his anger at not even making the bench. Rangers were dreadful. Celtic, even though they had Peter Grant sent off first before our 3 red cards, they deserved their win. Trevor Steven had a bad knee injury, which would rule him out for the rest of the season. So, the mood's kind of getting bleaker by the week, David. So Souness's response was to use McCoist as a scapegoat. He forced him to attend this press conference and apologise for going to the races, which McCoist was keen to caveat by starting off, in the manager's opinion, there has been a breach of discipline. There hadn't been a breach of discipline, there was no fine, because it was standard, as would have been standard practice, I guess, if there had been a breach. It's another weird, wild episode in this battle of egos. McCoist was then convinced that, like Monroe and Durrant, this was just because he was one of the original ones. He's incredibly popular. This had been the kind of narrative of the season, David, coming from the stands, coming from the enclosure, because McCoist wasn't starting. And McCoist kind of excused his performance in the league game by saying, like Brazil in the World Cup, that he'd been affected by that psychological blow. And he was carrying a knock in any case. Well, you carry it both ways. You're either fit or you're not. But this is a deliberate humiliation of a Rangers hero, Davey, and even amongst the most conservative opinions, there was starting to be a lot of fear. I quote the Rangers historian Robert McElroy on the 15th of April. He published his latest edition and said, look, Souness had contributed to this apparent collapse, and should the dream of a third successive league title for the first time since the war finally crumble, then surely the time will have come for a reappraisal by the Rangers board of the current management situation at Ibrox. Big words.
Yeah, they are big words, and maybe we could say that it's a little bit, looking back and going through what we've gone through, but the circumstances were different, and there was no doubt. I mean, I love that Walter's loyalty is tremendous to Graeme Souness, but the idea that people weren't noticing the erratic behaviour is simply not true. And McCoist felt, you mentioned there, McCoist felt that it was because he was one of the originals, that only Graeme Souness will know. He felt also that it was because he was a very popular figure. It was that. I mean, it absolutely was that. Souness massively resented that fans would take somebody else's side.
David, I mean, David, you love Ali McCoist probably more than anyone.
He's my hero.
Probably more than life, right? I think we're all the same with McCoist. He'd be bloody infuriating though at times, or wouldn't he? Because he's so clever in the way. And I would imagine at times there would be cases where Souness would go, he's so it's not squeaky clean, Ali, but.
No. Don't get me wrong. He would be
frustrating.
He would, he would be cheeky. He would answer back, and Souness, who at this, I think he's always taken himself quite seriously.
Yes,
but at this period in particularly. But I think it was a lot to do with the fact that you can't really turn around and shout at 44,000 people, but you can blame the guy. And we do it as supporters. We do it where we don't want to fall out with the manager because he's not picking a player, so we blame the player who's in the team as if it's his fault, and it's not. It's the manager who signed him and picked him. But we project onto the person because we don't want to project onto the other person, and that's exactly what's happening here. The disciplinary thing, the way Souness kind of put it out there, and remember back then, managers had they still do, but especially the managers had their pet journos, and it was put out McCoist had basically been on the lash, and nobody had any clue he was there, or he'd been expressly, it was hinted he'd been expressly told he couldn't go, none of which was true. And he was used now again in terms of clear-sighted management. One, Ali McCoist was very popular with the support. Two, Ali McCoist was very popular with the players. So scapegoating him is counterproductive. Unless he had actually done. And footballers, like anybody else in the workplace, or any other workplace, if you go after somebody for no reason, if you go after somebody because they've misbehaved, players respond to that because they see, right, well, that's fair enough. He's went after him and he's shown who the boss is. They respond to that. If you scapegoat somebody for no reason other than the fact that it makes you look a bit better, players don't respond to that because, of course, they then think, well, it could be me next.
And I also think Walter Smith, too, to be honest with you, really close with Ali McCoist, and you just wonder what was going on behind the scenes as well.
It was poor management, and again, it's this string of bad decisions that Souness is making, which I will say is partly due to pressure, partly, let's be honest, because his eye is wandering and he's starting to get itchy feet. Right. I mentioned this right at the start that eventually, the first of these shows that I did, I mentioned eventually the world that Souness was inhabiting got too small for him. And that's why we knew it was going to happen with Gerrard as well, because there comes a point where Scottish football, with its stultifying idiosyncrasies, becomes, we know it. It gets frustrating and boring for us, but we've, no escape, right? We know that this is our lot as fans. We're stuck with Scottish football. There's nothing we can do, and it's also why when we get into Europe, it feels, when we get in a run in Europe, it feels like a breath of fresh air because it's different and it's exciting and it's vivid. Whereas Scottish football can quite often be routine and, you're playing the same teams all the time, and you're running into these nyaffs who are out to make a name against you because you're Rangers. And Graeme Souness, eventually, it just became far, far too small for him. And this is it. So what he's doing is, as we all do when we're under pressure, we make bad decisions, and then our egos don't allow us to say, I made a bad decision there, and I'll apologise and atone for it. Our egos make us go,
we dig further in the hole, don't we? Yeah.
That's it. Don't back down, double down, and that's what Souness was doing left, right, and centre. And fires are he's starting them a lot of the time. And look, as I mentioned earlier, the thing with the tea lady, that to me is an example, though, of mitigation. I mean, that is the kind of thing he was facing. People decided he's too big for his boots, and they therefore felt that they could behave to him in any way they wanted because they knew that other people would back them. And we still see that with Rangers in the 21st century, that people know they can say certain things about us because other people who hate us will automatically agree with them. Yeah. So Souness was facing that, but you need to do what Walter would do in those circumstances, which is you box clever. You play the politics. But this particular version, certainly, of Graeme Souness was not going to do that. He was not going to think politically. He was not going to think, right, I should back down here. And if challenged, the chest came out. It's what we loved about him. The chest came out, and the club started swinging. The problem was, by now, he's swinging it at his own. He's swinging it at whoever's near him. And I think there was this growing sense with Souness that we weren't his number one focus anymore. And this is not unique to him as a manager. We've seen it with Mourinho. We've seen it with Benitez even. They go into a club and they achieve success. And then after a year, they don't have to build it from the start anymore. They've built, if you like, the apparatus to be successful, and they've built the structure that they need. And then they get bored because they've all this extra time. So what do they then do? They then go, right, well, I want control of this. And right, I'm not happy with him who does the transfers, so I'm gonna engage in a war against him. And I think it is just this restless spirit that these achievers have, that they've got to be doing something, and it's on to the next thing. And in Souness's case, that energy, that relentless drive and energy, was just coming out in all these wrong places. This is piss poor management. And yes, I'm biased because Ali McCoist, but I love Graeme Souness as well. Yeah. But this, McCoist had not done anything wrong. And of course, Souness then gets criticised on the day because we get beat. Where's Ali McCoist? I mean, in this era, still to this day, but especially in this era, we would have sent Ali McCoist into like the Reykjavik summit because we felt he would, he'd come back with a nuclear arms treaty.
David, you're absolutely right. The popularity thing is at the forefront of Souness. A couple other points. McCoist had gone home before the Cheltenham thing. Had gone home from St Andrews. They went away for a few days or whatever, as Rangers did, up to St Andrews, and McCoist just went home in a huff. He was sitting in the pub, and he said, "What am I doing here? I'm not in the team. I don't really feel like I want to be here." So he booked a taxi. I think someone at the hotel told Smith. Smith came out of the room and said, "Where are you going?" So I'm just going home. I'll suit yourself then. Oh, there's a reserve game tomorrow. I'll just play in that, make myself useful kind of thing. So you're on in a bit of a huff, a bit of a petty luck, which I don't think would have gone down well with the manager at all. And the other thing that I think Souness resented and had reason to resent from the support was this selection thing. He'd gone with Hateley and Johnson as his favoured two. The support hated that and criticised him. And I think he felt that he had done enough to be trusted with those decisions in terms of what he'd won for the club and done in that time. And he was correct. At the start of next season, Smith starts, sorry to spoil, but he starts with Hateley and Johnson. Because again, they are the best combination of those three at that time. McCoist isn't doing the biz the way that those two are. And I think Souness would be entitled to feel a bit pissed off at the fans, still not giving him the benefit of the doubt there. But again, it comes down to exactly what you said, David. It's a popularity thing, and football fans are exactly like that. Sorry, Al.
Oh, you're okay. No, it's okay. Yeah, I just think the point I was trying to make is it's not all. Although I've been really critical, quite rightly, of Graeme Souness, in various areas, and I can see it. And as David said, he's actually making fires himself all over the place. I just feel, and as much as I love Ali McCoist too, I feel that McCoist probably would put his hands up and say, to be honest, maybe occasionally I do push it a wee bit too much, But at one point, the narrative just seemed to be Ali was absolutely squeaky clean, can't do anything wrong at all, and it's just all big bad him, Now, 90% of the time, Graeme Souness definitely, and come this season, it's just a complete mess. But as I say, there's just that wee bit as well where it would be so bloody infuriating to have somebody in your team, you know, as a leader, you know, doing that. And as David said as well, the impact that he will have there and his mates as well within the squad. And so you can see those tensions, you know, across the piece. Yeah.
I think, Souness always wanted McCoist to respond. Now, the Cheltenham thing is beyond ridiculous and completely unwarranted. There was no breach, there was no fine, there was nothing. It was Souness just trying to deflect from a bad handling of that particular game and the fact that things were starting to nosedive. McElroy and the historian, that was the 15th of April, asking for maybe there needs to be a reappraisal. Of course, little did he know that, well, it was being carried out and it had already been carried out. At the end of March, David Murray had no idea that his Rangers manager was planning an exit. 1st of April, Sunday, Souness took a trip down to Southampton to see his prospective team. He could easily use the excuse because his ex-wife and children were living in Guildford. They could pass that off as just, taking in a game whilst going to see them. Took his dad, explained to his dad at half-time, by the way, I'm going there next season, effectively. His dad took it well, but that wasn't the reaction that he was really worried about. It was, of course, David Murray's. They have that usual dinner date on a Friday night. Andy and John and I talked about divorce when we were talking about Butcher, and this is even worse. Murray's starting to pick up on he's driving Souness back to his flat, which he would normally do, and said, "You're going to Liverpool, aren't you?" The two of them sat outside on the wall next to Souness's apartment in Edinburgh. Lovely spring evening, kind of weighing up what needed to happen. Now, interesting you talk about sabbaticals earlier, David. Murray pretty much offered him whatever he wanted, even suggested taking a year out and coming back, remaining on the board, and you still got that interest there. It's kind of like a married couple talking about how to manage an affair. Souness told him he wanted to leave once the league had been won, but Murray eventually found that position, said, "No, best if you go now." And like many a jilted spouse has correctly predicted, David, Souness was told he was making a big mistake. Once Murray's in the loop, this is the second week of April, no mood to mess around. Souness actually recommended promoting Smith. That seemed to be the best solution on grounds of ability, better profile. Souness had attracted a lot of pressure. Smith would probably diffuse a lot of that. Murray's immediate response was for a big name. A lot of the fans' response was for a big name, by the way.
David Edgar's immediate response was for a big name.
Yeah.
On the grounds I was 13.
Yeah.
But, no, I mean, look, absolutely, it's like really Walter, because he was, at this point.
But no one knew this. This is early April. Smith was proactive. He went to Murray and said, "Look, what's happening?" Possibly with that other conversation in mind, I don't know.
Yes.
And Murray eventually asked the unnecessary question in Smith's words. Of course, Smith would take the job if offered, but Murray needed more time. He spoke to Richard Gough for his opinion. It was short and certain. Give it to Smith, does most of the work in the training ground, and it made sense just to get this title, which is now just a matter of 2 points, by the way, between us and Aberdeen, over the line. Ray Wilkins was suggested as an alternative, but Murray's mind was kind of set. And him and Smith walked down the tunnel before the game with St Johnstone on 13th of April. And Murray said, "That's it. If you want the job, you can have it." Now, no one knows a thing at this stage. That's Saturday, 13th of April. And a bit of poignancy, because that's Graeme Souness' final game in charge. The previous week had seen more jitters. Rangers drew 0-0 with Hibs. But there was one ray of light, David, with the return of Rangers hero 28 months after that day at Aberdeen. Ian Durrant finally made his comeback. And then, after those nerves had been kind of dealt with, he scored the first goal in this 3-0 win over St Johnstone at Ibrox. With a lot of empty spaces, it should be pointed out. We tend to think of this era of milk and honey as being full to the rafters, but it absolutely wasn't that day. But those who were there got to salute one of their own, whilst having no idea, David, that they would never get the chance to salute the man who developed him into a star, because 3 days later, Graeme Souness left Rangers.
We're obviously very disappointed that he's made this decision. It was Graeme's wish that we could keep it like that to the end of the season, but I felt that the sooner it's cleared up, the better, and that he feels free. He's free to go on to Liverpool. That was not Graeme's choice, but we feel we've got a championship to win, and that's got to be the priority. I'll ask Graeme to say a few words.
I won't be taking questions. I'd just like to say that there are two main reasons why I've decided to go to Liverpool. The first one, which is the biggest one, I have 3 young children who are at an age where I feel I should be spending more time with them. Living and working in England will allow me to do that. And also the other one, on the football side, I now feel I've gone as far as I'll be allowed to go in trying to achieve success at this football club.
The one thing we'll always remember is no man is bigger than Rangers Football Club, whether it be Graeme Souness, David Murray or anybody who plays here. The most important thing is, as I said already, is to win this league and deliver for the supporters something that they've supported both Graeme and the rest of us on the board so much in the past. In the perfect world, it would have been a situation where I'd like Graeme to stay to the end of the season. And when it became quite obvious that the story had leaked, I felt as a chairman it was a situation that couldn't go on any longer, and therefore asked Graeme if he would leave prior to the end of the season.
I would like to state that I wanted to stay until the end of the season. It's been decided by the board. They feel it's the best thing and the best interest of this football club if I go now, and I have to accept it.
Scottish Football Association have forced Graeme Souness right out of Scottish football. He was the man who revitalised this, brought all the English players up to Scotland, and now at the end of the day, that's why I think they've forced him out of Scottish football.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Hear that he's leaving. He's done a great job for Scottish football as well as Rangers, you know.
Do you think he's changed the face of Scottish football?
Oh, I think so, definitely. You know, he brought in the big. He made all the other clubs buy players as well as buying them himself, you know.
I mean, I thought he was doing a good enough job at Ibrox, and obviously he's decided that under the pressure from the SFA that he's decided that enough's enough, and he's been messed about with the SFA so much.
You feel he's had a hard time from the football authorities?
Yes, I would agree with Graeme Souness that he's definitely had a hard time from them with Jim Farry's, the way that they've been dishing out the fines, not only to Graeme Souness personally but also to Rangers. The excessive ban, the 23,000 for the over the lager advert, and also the touchline ban that he got.
It's this Scottish Football Association have been on his back ever since the first game he played at Easter Road when he got ordered off. He's been banned to the end of next season for sitting in the dugout.
Yeah, and when the announcement came, it was like, it felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I mean, I remember having a physical reaction to it. And people say, you know, brace yourself for bad news. It's not as bad. You guys know me, and listeners will know me, that I don't do that because it still hurts. You know, it's why I don't go about saying, oh, you know, we're all doomed and we're going to lose the league, because I know that the fact that I've thought that isn't going to make losing the league, for example, or losing the cup match any better. So, although I'd been aware that this might happen, I suppose in my heart I never believed it. And I remember it being an almost physical thing of, well, what do we do now? You know, now I've known another Rangers manager at this stage of my career, so it's not like he's all I know. So I know that a replacement will come in. But he was such an epochal figure, not only in Rangers history, but in my life, you know, as a Ranger. He was just, as I mentioned earlier, he's my generation's other dad. Walter would, of course, come through and just, you know, take that mantle on. But at that point, you're kind of, oh, goodness. And the timing did seem weird. And I think that initially there was a lot of chat on the phone end about, well, could they not just have waited to the end of the season? You're absolutely right. That was Murray. This is first decade Murray. Yeah. Decisive. Maybe not always right, but decisive, making a decision. And you know, when you talk about it being a divorce, that's exactly what it's like. That's, you know, I want to go. One of the things that I think needs to be mentioned is, I'm sure we've all been in this position. Once your mind is made up to go, you can't get back into the headspace to stay easily. It's why never accept a counter offer as a kind of truism in business. Once you've decided you want to go, it's very difficult to then get your head back into with the same level of commitment that you showed previously. And I think that's where Souness was. And he had to go. You know, he did. He because he would always have been looking at it and dreaming and wondering what if. And you've got to make these decisions and stick by them. It was the wrong decision. He said that himself. But my initial thing then was, you know, sorrow, heartbreak about it, but then excitement about, well, who can we get in? Because some of the names I'm sure you're going to talk about in a minute were mouth-watering. I mean, at this point, we could probably have got anybody who wasn't managing, you know, the top 5 or 6 sides in Italy, really. And I don't think that's unrealistic to say that. We could have done that. We could have gone out to England and taken out the manager. And the names that were being bandied about, you know, Beckenbauer, Ferguson, George Graham, you know, seemed fantastical. The next step, of course, was then the papers. And again, this was where Murray's first decade genius was. He used the papers fantastically effectively. You know, in the long term, that probably the detrimental effect. But at this point, he was very good at it. So Walter starts getting mentioned, not as Rangers are going to appoint Walter, but Rangers should appoint Walter. And the press back then was a hell of a lot more influential than it was. It was a hell of a lot more respected. Sure, we all had journalists we didn't like, but if something was in the papers, we still had this sort of naive belief that there had to be something in it. That, of course, has eroded. We know how the sausage is made now. But back then, there was this sort of mysticism still about it. If it was in the papers, then somebody had to be saying it. And they lined up a lot of people, current players, ex-players, respected figures in football to come out. And they began to sort of talk you into it, which was very clever. Because then...
It had been done. The deal was done.
The deal was already done, but they didn't just say, Souness is away and here's Walter. They let them be the speculation, the names to get mentioned, but then very cleverly they just began, so that you almost felt, and again, I keep going back to it's true, I'm a young guy, but, you know, I'm with a lot of Bears at Cross Keys Supporters Club. You know, I'm hearing a lot of adult voices as well. And, you know, they're coming round to it. You know, they're beginning to say, but they feel like it's their idea. You know, they feel like they've made the decision that we should go for Walter. Now, as you say, we have. He's going to be a manager. But people are beginning to almost feel they've made the journey themselves. But look, I've criticised David Murray a lot. I always will. My feelings about him will not change. But he was absolutely correct here. You know, in a broken down relationship, don't hang about in the house, you know, get your stuff and bugger off and let's start moving on with our life. And he was absolutely correct to do it. I know it was a gamble that might and looked for all the world like it wasn't going to pay off, but it was the right thing to do. And do you both remember loads of talk in the papers and saying to Greavesy and that Souness could win the league twice? He was going to win both the English and Scottish in the same season. And I always remember at the time thinking, hang on, if he gets the credit for winning it at Liverpool, doesn't Walter get the credit for winning it here? But apparently not.
Alan, we heard the press conference there, Tuesday 16th of April, and Richard Gough talks about bumping into Souness coming down the marble staircase. All the best, he said, to make sure and win the title. And Gough noticed the visible emotion. He was always crying. This tough, often ruthless man was close to tears. It was a very emotional moment for him. Some obvious similarities to his political hero 20 weeks, almost to the day before. Another abrasive figure with a single mind who had kind of shaped the surrounding environment forever. Had also some tears in her eyes as she left down the street. But that press conference, Alan, I again come back to this divorce thing. Murray was very comfortable with the press before and on camera, and he would be again. He is not good in that press conference. He's drinking water as much as he can. Souness is at pains to say that, you know, I would like to stay. I wanted to stay until the end of the season, but it's been decided by the board that they feel it's best interest of the football club if I go now, and I have to accept that. Again, Murray looks irritable. And Souness again says, look, you know, I feel I've gone as far as I'll be allowed to go and try and achieve success at this football club. Quite a lot of people likened it to a kind of scalded schoolboy in the headmaster's office, but I don't. I think there's a lot of parity in status. Souness almost puts his arm on Murray's back, which I think is a really interesting bit of body language. But this is the final session of couples counselling. There's both patients kind of trying valiantly to get to the end. It's quite a remarkable bit. It's not long. The 8 questions, but it's just a remarkable bit of theatre, I guess.
Yeah, and if you think of how the relationship will appear to start, was obviously Souness, then the relationship with Murray, and then kind of, Murray having a wee talk about coming into Rangers. So in a way, really, it was the kind of Souness, the impact that brought David Murray in there. So, and as you say, I think they were meeting every Friday. I think practically was it not a case of on the phone all the time, each day, and they were really close. As you say, there was a real big emotional one there. I must admit, from my point of view as well, it's even the body language, as you say, he looked quite nervous, but even the way Graeme Souness was kind of sitting, he just wasn't looking that as if, look at me, I'm just totally in control, like the kind of Maurice Johnson one, just, you could tell, a major emotional thing. I think for us too, like David said, it was in one way it was a big blow. I think for me it was more a timing. It was just the fact that, look, we've got 4 games to go now. But to be honest with you, I've got the same view as all you guys in the end with Murray. I think at that point in time he did absolutely the right thing and went, well, no, as far as I'm concerned now, you go now. It just wouldn't have helped at all. Definitely risky. From me, like Davey, I was thinking Beckenbauer and Graham and all of that mob. I think it was my dad had said to me, what about his assistant? And I'm like, well, again, didn't really know that much about Walter. And he was, well, think about Dundee United and with Jim McLean, and the guy learned a bit there, maybe the influence he's had on him, so. And also, I don't know if you picked up too, I read recently the discussion that David Murray had with Walter Smith. I think David Murray had contacted him and said to him, look, have you heard, about the whole, was he talking about the Liverpool one now? And I think he was sussing out Walter. Now, Walter could just have says, don't know what you're talking about, no, nothing. But Walter, being Walter, actually just faced up to it and said, yeah, to be honest with you, he has spoken to me about it. And I think that was a nice, cute one as well. And I think that sent out a wee signal to David Murray as well about the kind of person that, that Walter Smith was as well. I think that helped him, obviously. Obviously, Graeme Souness was trying, I think he said he was encouraging to take Walter Smith. It'd be quite interesting because, again, really good relationships between the two of those guys. Souness potentially could have scuppered that one and could have went to Murray and said, see, to be honest with you, Walter, he's done okay, but, so in a way, I think it showed a nice bond between the three of them. But as you say, it was just like, the thing's broken now, away you go. And I think the media too, if you look at all the headlines as well, it was very, very positive around, nah, that's it, you've said you've go now. We rallied as well. I had seen various managers kind of come and go, but again, there was this feeling of, oh shit, we're up against it now. But the Rangers fans pretty quickly, we rallied. And as David said, when they announced Walter, was it maybe 3 days later or something before the St Mirren game? In a way, you're like, no, that's fine. We go with that one and see how it goes.
I mean, it's interesting you're talking about the body language thing that you mentioned, the Mo Johnson press conference. And you forget that Johnson's almost being cuddled by Souness.
It's that weird photo, where he's basically leaning into him and he's got his arm around him.
And he's got this situation, whereas this weird, frosty, Murray's always looking the other way. Souness is trying it, as I said, tries to put his hand.
There's like a V between them when you look at the way the two of them are sitting, isn't there, as well?
Yeah, look, it's at that level and that type of relationship. And again, I would argue that Murray got too close to these managers and it blinded him at times. Yep. He should have sacked Walter, as heretical as to say it, beforehand. And even then, he doesn't make the decision. He can stay at the end of the season and basically make it. And Walter said afterwards, no, I was sacked. It's just, he let me say it. He should have sacked Advocat before he did. And then when he did, he didn't. He invents a job for him, so he doesn't actually have to sack him. He should have sacked McCoist several times before he did. He got too close to these managers. Now, you might say that that's a good thing, and at times it would have been, but there was something, I think, untenable. I don't think your manager should be a director and, have a stake and all that. I think it complicates matters a great deal. He was hurt on a personal level. It's like, why do you want to leave me? Because that's what it felt like. And if you work closely with someone, especially when it's your business, as opposed to, if you're working for a big multinational, you sort of accept that someone might get a better offer. But when it's your business, it's your life, and you feel it much more deeply. I've worked for a few businesses that were owned by like the director who worked there, and it's so draining because they take things personally. They can't know it. Their business is their life. So that's sort of what it was like, and it was an awkward press conference. Souness, I'm sure, isn't used to being told publicly in front of a room that he's making a terrible mistake. There's very few people, I think, incidentally, would have taken that from. David Murray was one of them, and it was very much, as you say, Martyn, I should get the kids. No, Your Honour, I'll have the kids, with the press playing that sort of magisterial role. So I think that there was a sense of rejection. Nobody likes to be chucked, and that's what was happening to Murray. And as you say, he sat there and I can change, and you can do this, and he's gone through all that. But then once he's arrived at no, he really does want to leave me, he was quite steely in how he wanted it to go. But it is interesting that very quickly he has transferred that bond that he has with Souness to Walter.
Yeah, because that's how he likes to do it.
Walter has spoken before about he had a good relationship with Murray, but obviously didn't see him every day the way Souness did, and he didn't have dinner with him every Friday. But very quickly he does. He has that relationship with him, and I think it was just the way Murray wanted it to be, that the number two guy at the club in his mind was the manager, and the manager would be joined at his hip. And it was good in a sense for the managers, because you could never accuse him of not being loyal. Genuinely, you absolutely couldn't accuse him of not being loyal. But I do think there were times where personal relationships got in the way of decisions he would have taken in other areas of his business a lot quicker.
It's one of those examples of businessmen running football clubs in a way that they wouldn't run their business, because it's an emotional game. It's it must affect the ego in ways that the simple humdrum of business can't do. So this weird interregnum between the Tuesday and the Friday, that week in April, where speculation is running wild about who's next, despite the fact it's already been decided. Dalglish was quoted very early. George Graham was quoted, despite the fact he was leading Arsenal really to the title by that point. Ray Wilkins as well, although Smith actually had quoted Ray Wilkins to be his assistant, but he again didn't want to leave London. And Franz Beckenbauer, who just less than a year after winning the World Cup with West Germany, not having a great time in Marseille, was one of the others. The response, we've heard some clips from fans interviewed on that day. Again, looking to follow fall is always very interesting. The first edition, published in early May, the front page offers up the star prize of an Austin Metro for anyone who shoots Souness. So taking it very calmly. And there is anger in the pages about the lies that he told when he turned down the job in February. Well, it's not lies. He did turn down the job. I'm sure at some level he did intend to stay, but things change.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mark, but that is one of my kind of pet hates. That it happens to us as well on Heart and Hand, that we'll say something and people will say, well, you said a few months ago that and it's like, well, yeah, but it was true then. Things change, and for some reason as football fans we seem unable to accept this, that things change, people change their minds, circumstances develop. What was true in May might not be true in November, but as football fans we are like children. But you said, and you're absolutely correct there. There was, but you said, now I do understand it incidentally with you said you weren't going and it must be a lie because you are going.
No, I don't.
It's not a lie. It's just that, as you say, in February he didn't want to go. But equally, now that I've got that off my chest, I do think though that you do have to be a wee bit more careful. Don't make hostages to fortune. Instead.
Yeah, I mean that's football. I mean, who stays forever? No one. So we should all kind of be aware of that. In those pages of follow, amongst all the anger, and there's a lot of it, just about every single letter or article is prefaced by some variation of, he was by far and away, however, the best thing to ever happen to Rangers. And there was a real interesting one from a person writing under the pseudonym McDougall, that it's really, really balanced and fascinating. Sometimes it reads like this kind of detached observer. Sometimes it reads like a fan kind of years down the line. He said, this guy could be brutal, dangerously temperamental, and cynically ruthless. He created many problems as were visited often unjustly on him. Nonetheless, he gave us and restored to us a sense of greatness and made us believe that anything was possible and achievable. But then later on in the same piece, it's like this kind of melancholic love letter about a departed partner. He was no fly-by-night. He stayed 5 years, although that now seems like 5 weeks. Put the Simon Mayo music under that. Something wonderful is gone, although there is no reason why something as great cannot be achieved again in the future. Unfortunately, the squalidness of the way the affair has been handled and the parting shots and innuendos encourage the feelings of betrayal. I don't think all this should be allowed to tarnish some treasured memories. Dynamo Kiev at Ibrox, the 5-1 game, Piotr 87. None of us deep down would have missed the last 5 years for anything. So from the heart, thanks, you piss elegant, arrogant bastard. Cup, I for one will toast you. The general feeling is like he's had to go. You've heard people on the clips on the news saying, been forced out by the SFA, but it was only going one way, became too big for Scottish football, he changed Scottish football and they hated him for it. Clearly there's a lot in that. Gents, we are on episode 20, I think, of this series. We started in the first week of January. He's gone. It's taken us to this point to kind of get there. And this father figure, and it was, especially for someone of my generation, but the father of the revolution, because without him, this entire story doesn't happen. Or certainly doesn't happen the way it did. We won't be talking about him again, or not much over the rest of the year. David, what is Souness to Rangers?
Well, we've got over 20 hours in this series that probably still doesn't get to the essence of that. Graeme Souness saved Rangers for me in that era, because we were going nowhere and we were getting used to going nowhere. And he arrived at a very low ebb with a lot of teams to overcome. He didn't have to get past Celtic. He had to get past Aberdeen, Celtic, Hearts, Dundee United. And he turned us around quickly. He gave us a swagger back. Rangers, when we don't have a swagger, are not really fully capable of being Rangers, and Souness delivered that. I think he widened our horizons as well. He changed the way that we viewed football. He changed the way that we perceived ourselves, and he changed, I think, the perception of Scottish football in general. He also did things that would then resonate throughout, still to this day. Foreign players became commonplace, not just at Rangers. Once the seal had been broken, so many other clubs went into those markets as well, and he changed it. In our history, he is this enormous, anarchic, fun, interesting, demanding period. He's the he's the French Revolution, he's the Russian Revolution, he's this sort of period where anything was possible, with the old rules, the order, everything that had gone before. Not only could it be changed, there was a very good chance he was going to go and deliberately change it. The Mo Johnston signing, of course, only Souness of all the managers in our history could have pulled that one off, because only Souness would have had the belief that he could do it. He would not be bound by anything. And at times throughout his career, this is not just Graeme Souness at Rangers, this will continue. At times that's something that would hurt him. Famously at Liverpool, he gives an interview to The Sun because I want to talk to The Sun, and just because they don't want me to isn't going to stop me. So sometimes that could be a negative for him. I think that he is almost unquantifiable in terms of importance, in terms of building the modern Rangers, for good and for bad, and for things that would then follow. I think that you use the term father figure, that would actually have a slightly negative effect down the line. I believe in the early 2000s, when bad things were going on in the background, that Rangers fans had become so infantilized. Yeah. We just wanted Daddy, be it David Murray or the manager, to fix things for us. We just felt that we got to just cry and wail and stamp our feet and things should happen. And Souness unknowingly was a big part of that creation. But what he did was he brought a vibrancy to not just Rangers but to Scottish football that hadn't been there before. He ushered in a very, very exciting period for Rangers, but for other clubs. Celtic becoming a modern football club happened because of Graeme Souness. You know, he is the seeds that lead to the dynasty downfall and McCann and everything coming in, along with David Murray. You know, I mean, that was a big part of it as well, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I honestly, yeah, as I say, I look, you know, he's the punk rock of music, getting rid of all those boring bands that Alan likes. He was just somebody that came along and said, the rules don't apply to me. And sometimes that was fantastic because it meant he could think in a way that nobody else in Scottish football would have been able to think. At other times, he would do something that made you realise why certain rules are in place, you know, because they're there for good reason. But you could never ever look away. He made every day the papers essential. You know, he made every time. There was always a sense of danger. It becomes exhausting, and I think I'm a great believer that, you know, action, reaction. And I think that after this spell, this breakneck 5 years, which, as the chap there mentioned, when he went, felt like 5 minutes, because it was just breathless. You never stopped. We were always linked to a player. There was always an incident. There was always something happening when Graeme Souness was around. He's kind of like that girlfriend, that amazing looking girlfriend that every day is a drama. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not so great. And after that, you tend to maybe go for somebody a wee bit more stable, maybe a bit less glam, but somebody that's a wee bit more dependable. And that's when Walter comes in. And Walter is the soothing balm. That there wasn't this up and down anymore. There was still this relentless push for silverware, but it was done in a slightly different fashion. And Walter kind of restored some of the, if you like, the varnish, the traditional stuff that Rangers fans prize, that Souness had sort of disbanded. But it needed that. We needed shaking up. I think, though, that the last club he should have went to was Liverpool, because it needed exactly what Rangers had, and he couldn't quite bring himself to do that there because he was a part of that. He knew things had to change. You know, there was bits and bobs he played around with, but at the end of the day, he was a traditionalist there, and they needed an agent of change like he had been at Rangers. But yeah, he's a huge part of our history, because managers can come to a club, be successful, and leave virtually no legacy. Dick Advocaat. Graeme Souness left a legacy not only at Rangers but the whole of Scottish football that even now, almost 40 years later, I think we still feel in many ways.
Yeah, I think the Liverpool, this isn't a pod about Liverpool, but slightly harsh. He did know he had to change things, and certainly the diet stuff. Italy really changed Graeme Souness's view on a lot of things. They were still having their chippy and their beer and the bus back from games and stuff like that. But as Walter correctly warned them in that sauna, Liverpool haven't gone through 10 years of fuck all. They're champions of England. They will not accept that kind of revolutionary change because they will not accept they need it. And that's what Souness walked straight into. Alan, doing this project, as much as he gave his assurances and that directorship, that stake in the club, these are all long-term promises. But given the nature of the man, the nature of the era that David's articulated so well, I'm actually surprised we get 5 years, because it was just constant excitement. the newspapers were never short of anything when it came to Graeme Souness and Rangers, and it was needed, but it was never a long-term 10-year era thing. There was just never any chance. I don't think he could last that. We would know actually physically he wouldn't be able to last that. But I'm actually quite surprised we got 5 years out of him without that exploding in the way that it did. Your thoughts on that, and some short.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were on our knees, obviously, when he came in. Again, we mentioned earlier on David Holmes, massive credit to him, to bring him in, and suddenly bringing in this celebrity, he just added colour. I mean, he was obviously the class in terms of the football, and from that successful Liverpool team, I thought what was good as well is it crossed even beyond football. Obviously it raised the whole Rangers profile. The factors that we talked about before as well, about the English, out of Europe and, stadia and so on. It actually came at a good time in terms of being able to kind of capitalise on that and bring in the likes of the Butchers and so on. Totally transformed us. Actually a bit similar to the Steven Gerrard, when you think of when Gerrard came and then he brought in from where the team was to where it was when he left. But my God, there wasn't a day went by without something to do with Graeme Souness or something to do with Rangers. So it raised the profile no end. I think the European thing was the big frustration again on that one. And again, he's obviously got a place in our history, without a doubt, up there. He's certainly not one of in terms of the greatest ever Rangers or greatest manager or so on. But what he did in that time, and as you say, Martyn, the player-manager thing as well, and all of the stuff that was going on around, to probably last that length of time, was a surprise, because he kind of almost burnt himself out early on, tended to take a bit of a breather. The Mo Johnson thing gave him the control, and then here we go again, from it. So, no, I think Rangers fans overall, what he did, I think we should be grateful. Again, I think you guys know I mean, Rangers were there way before Graeme Souness. They'll be there way after him as well. He did play a good part, in our history. And you'll actually find out in terms of the brand too, maybe not as high profile, but the guy following him in the end gave us, Dave has mentioned that, just that wee bit more stability, the way Rangers traditionally were and so on. But again, still kept us at a top level where we continued to keep, kind of winning and pushing forward. So, I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I think we'd mentioned at the time, put it this way, when he was there at the start, if I hadn't had a daughter or a son, my son was going to be called Graeme. So that probably tells you even my view about the impact that he, in those early stages. And I think the whole Rangers, loads of money, swagger that we had was just fantastic at that point in time, just for those so many years. Players coming. I mean, when Graeme Souness came to join us, it was, we've got the Scotland captain, that's how low we were. But through the time, you end up getting the likes of the Butchers, the Wilkins, Hateleys. It was just phenomenal. And obviously it gave us a great platform just to kind of push on. I always felt in his heart of hearts, it was Liverpool, wasn't it? But hey, that's fine. David says as well, in business, you've got opportunities. He saw this one, he did really well on it. And fine, the guy moves on. I think that's okay. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, you mentioned something there, which I think is absolutely understandable. Rangers were there before Graeme Souness, but thereafter. But I would always caution against this feeling of inevitability. That again, the big wheel turns and you'll have your time again. There's nothing inevitable about it. Just because football history is marked with great names from the early 20th century, huge clubs that are now a footnote.
Yeah, excellent point.
Inevitable. I think you continue on, and I listen. Graeme Souness is not the greatest Rangers manager there's ever been.
No.
Struth and Smith are now.
Well, isn't
way
that
out
interesting?
there.
We've all spoken
Dave.
about
Yeah.
we've all spoken about how big he is in Rangers history, but you're right, he's not on the Mount Rushmore, is he?
No, with Wilton.
In terms of
Smith.
managerial stuff, I think that's absolutely correct. That Struth and Smith are way out there. In terms of figures, in terms of the impact of the person, then Struth creates Rangers, right? Really, he creates it. He changes it from a football club to an institution, and there's a whole culture and a whole different world around it in terms of standards and everything else. So it's not Graeme Souness' fault that he wasn't around before Bill Struth. That's not how history works. But Rangers were plummeting, and yep, there'll be better managers that have been before, and there were better managers that came after. But I don't think, certainly in my lifetime, there has been a bigger figure or a more important figure in the history of Rangers Football Club by a mile, because you don't have Smith and you don't have anything else that comes after. Like, you don't have Murray for better.
I was going to say, well, Murray did take his.
Yeah, he did an impact, didn't he?
He got Rangers to Division 3, and I'm not sure many other people. But I know what you mean in terms of positive upward impact. Then yes, I think that's a very legitimate argument.
And he came, Martyn, exactly at that time, didn't he? You know, the kind of perfect storm of you mentioned. You know what was happening down in England. You know, European football, and
still have to make it. You still have to make it happen. Like the conditions were perfect. We discussed that in episode 1 in the kind of prologue. That's fine, but you still need somebody to go and grab the thing.
Yeah. Life is timing.
Yes, it is.
You know, you can have all the ability in the world, but if you pop up at the wrong period, it's not your throw of the dice, then it won't matter. Yes, the conditions were perfect, but in 1986 we could have gone out and we could have hired, off the top of my head, Andy Gray to come in and be player manager. Andy Gray is a wonderful guy. He's a huge success in his life. You know, joking aside, look at what he's made himself almost a kind of a byword, really, within broadcasting. He would not have done what Graeme Souness did, even with being able to sign English players, even with Europe and all that. It was the man, and it's a really interesting thing. It's a much bigger debate, but in your view of any history, be it World War, be it, you know, the 19th century, whatever you're into, how important is the man or the circumstances? And the idea that it's only ever circumstances, which has got a lot of currency in historical revisionism in the last 30 years, I don't agree with. This does not happen without Graeme Souness. The very specific characteristics, good and bad, that we've, I think, fairly detailed on this. I think we've been very honest. Yeah. So no, totally agree.
We may touch on him over the course of the year, see how he's getting on at various jobs, but he certainly won't be dominating shows like he's done for the last 20 weeks. But I hope, listeners, and please feel free, you're never slow to, if we've done him a disservice, or this can't be hagiography. There's too much of that when it comes to Rangers, when it comes to football writing or podcasting, to be honest. When it comes to football history, you have to do it properly, you have to be critical, and I think we have when it's been merited, but also you can't go the other way. And I hope we've got that tone right. And if we don't, I don't care. It's my tone. So that and that's us for Graeme Souness and that era of Rangers. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much, Martyn. Not to timestamp it too much, but by the time you're listening to this, listeners, Martyn and I will be over to NASA to spend a bit of time with someone who was a big lieutenant in this, Mr. Richard Gough.
Indeed. We'll catching up with him. Thank you, Alan.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. No, thanks, Martyn. Thanks, David. That was good. And have fun over there and behave yourselves now. Yeah.
Always. In that little interregnum, a lot of Rangers players made quite a bit of money because they knew what was going to happen and they made sure their pals put some good bets on Walter Smith. But not all bookmakers paid out. Some waited a few months. The belief being, well, this might just be a caretaker. He's there to the end of the season. He's not the next Rangers manager. I hint then that it was an appointment that made sense to ensure continuity for the remaining 4 games of the season, but jarred slightly with the overall sense of ambition that Rangers had enjoyed projecting. For now, however, the bigger picture could wait. There was an extremely close title race coming to its conclusion. We'll be back next week to discuss that and more. Until then, Bye for now.